Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, we hear from the vehicle gameplay team answering our questions. CIG do not plan to wipe the servers for Alpha 320, plus we get some very exciting information regarding cargo and the future of the cargo mechanic and cargo grids in general. So this week's Inside Star Citizen kicked off explaining that the NA, or North American PU team, is actually made up of developers from Montreal's Turbulent team, as well as Austin and LA's office teams as well, kind of creating a super team who are making some of Star Citizen's Persistent Universe features, which includes things like in-game shops, physicalized cargo, plus they say they have just started looking into newer features like exploration. Now this team is set up to work on larger feature sets to ensure that these features have the time and resources required to deliver them at the quality level that CIG want them at. And right now, the North American PU team, or NAPU, are working on the next major evolution of cargo, working on things like freight elevators and hangars, and they say over the next 3, 6, 9 months and beyond, we will begin to see the true cargo career come to life. Now, talking about freight elevators, these are to be used in locations like hangars, but also places like outposts, and will allow the players to not just access their cargo, but everything in-game, like inventory, items, all your purchases and ship items and more, delivering them to a hangar where the player can then take them out and load them into their vehicles. Now they do mention that we will be using our tractor beams to move items between the elevator and hangar or ship, but I think it is still part of the plan from CIG to offer other options like flatbed trolleys, hover trolleys, other wheeled items and such. And I know a lot of people are quite concerned with not wanting to do all of the loading and unloading themselves by hand, which is understandable, and although it wasn't mentioned in this video, there will be, at some point, options to pay a little extra to expedite the process, or have NPCs coming and doing it for you, or even maybe hiring players. I'm sure there are players out there who will be happy to earn some creds, like Arirath, Zero to Hero stuff, just loading and unloading cargo for players. Although this won't be applicable everywhere, some places you will have to do it by hand, which would make sense because there's no one there to help. Now, they do mention that this will allow for some interesting and fun gameplay, as you try to work out how you stack and organize your cargo bay, and figuring this out will be part of the cargo hauling profession. They also want to support cargo throughout the whole Persistent Universe, which means outposts, underground facilities, these sorts of locations will also have cargo that will require loading and unloading. Basically, they are making the cargo a realistic part of the verse, having to interact with it as you would expect in the real world. Now, moving on to hangars, there will be two types of hangars. We have instanced and persistent. For the instanced hangars, this solves the issue of locations getting bogged down when too many players are in the same location wanting to deliver or pick up. If players are coming and going from Orison, for example, and all of the hangars there are physical, there would just be queues of players waiting for other players to physically load and unload their ship until they can get in and do the same. So as much as that would be realistic, it would be very irritating, very boring, and not very fun. So instanced hangars allows CIG to allocate a player a hangar, and once the player has flown in and the door is shut, that hangar will then be decoupled from the location, meaning they can have as many hangars as they need for the volume of players requesting them, without giving a player a time limit to get their stuff done. And this will allow players the time they need to do whatever they need to. You can spend some time in the hangar fixing your ship, loading it up, taking as long as you need, and then when you are ready to go, you contact the ATC. It will then physically put you in the game world again, and you will be able to take off. And for players, this will just seem seamless. You will not notice because once the door is shut, you can't see outside. Now, persistent hangars, these are the exciting ones for me. These are dedicated physical hangars and the first step to real player ownership in the game, beyond ships. Here, you will be able to keep everything that you have and own in your hangar, arrange it how you want, or just dump everything you want in your hangar, and it will stay there. You can even use it as your home, and long term, they would like us to be able to go around the different locations of the verse, buy new hangars, and so on and so forth. You can also have your friends come around and join you in your hangar, or join them in theirs, and this technology is the same tech that they will use for player hubs. Now this is music to my ears. I'm so happy that they have decided to use both options of persistent and instanced, rather than just going with instanced everywhere, as this will create a bit of a real estate supply and demand. Certain locations will have some available, certain ones won't because they are physical, which will be a whole new facet to the game. And hopefully it is something that we can see somewhat near future. I don't really expect it this year, as the work on persistent hangars goes on till towards the end of the year, so I think it's definitely more of a next year thing. But thankfully they're not just about to kick off this work, they are heavily into it already, but it is coming along pretty quickly. Now, for the cargo box inventory, in 320 we have a new array of box sizes from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, 32, if that's the right sizing, I can't remember. And for the next version of cargo beyond 320, we will have inventory container boxes as well, which is something we've been wanting for a long while, which allows players to store anything they want in these boxes, provided they can technically fit, like weapons, armors, even vehicles. Now, as we know, they are moving towards physical inventory, no longer personal inventory, so accessing all of your inventory at a location with one button will no longer be a thing once this update comes along, and you will be accessing only the items you have placed in specific locations. So for example, if you put something in a cupboard in your personal hab at a landing zone, then you must return to that cupboard to get that item back. You can't just be wandering around Tammany and Sons and press the I button to get everything in that location. It is location-based, physically placed inside a container. But this means that we will have the ability to actually put things in cargo boxes that will allow us to manage everything we have. And this opens up a lot of potential for many areas of the game to hauling your own stuff, like moving items from one hab to another, or if you've bought a new hab or a hangar or built a new place, you will be able to haul things over to it. Piracy, of course, with pirates gaining more new and unique loot by searching all the cargo boxes on board of the ships that they've boarded and disabled. But also this could allow for players to fill up a box and pay other players to move the stuff for you. So if someone is in Pyro and they have a load of stuff in a cargo container in Stanton, they don't want to come through and pick it up. They could put out a job for players to come and move it for them. And of course, one major aspect of Star Citizen in the future is logistics, especially for big org operations like a mining operation. You will need food, ammunition, tools, fuel, repair stuff, all sorts of gear that needs to be loaded and transported around the verse. Also on the way will be box properties, so having certain boxes that might be fragile, radioactive, or needing to be kept cool, and so much more. And this will also play into the climate controls of the cargo bay using the ship systems like the resource network, making sure that your cargo bay conditions is appropriate for the cargo you're carrying. Now, one monstrous change that I did not see coming was how they will be altering the cargo grid's ability to not just carry boxes, but possibly any sized item attached to them, which means ship weapons, components, missiles, vehicles, and items. And this is a pretty insane change that allows for complete freedom. I do remember reading on the patch notes that non-box items will be able to be attached to cargo grids. And I just thought that meant when you're salvaging, you can put a weapon in your hold and it will not bounce around. But when you look at the Hull C here carrying an Aurora, it really goes to show the scope of what's available here. And as you can see in the demo, being able to set up a little shop in your cargo hold, allowing others to browse your items. Can't wait to do that. I mean, we can technically do that now. If you gather a load of ship items and weapons and whatever, you can open the cargo bay door and allow people to come in and buy things from you. They can send you money. They can take the item. But obviously we need a bit more of a robust system there. But that was one hell of an episode. And episode 2 on the cargo updates will be next week. And it will be talking about vehicle and location inventory. Most likely about the shift to physical inventory. Larger cargo item support. Kiosk changes. An item bank. And unique item recovery, which I believe is relating to the subflare and how we get that back if we lose it. So another great episode coming next week. I am really stoked to see these systems making their way into the PU, but we will certainly be discussing this more on Twitch, so do follow the link to my Twitch channel if you want to join in on that conversation. Now, this week's Star Citizen Live was a big ol' Q&A from the vehicle gameplay team answering our questions. Now this gameplay team was formerly the vehicle experience team, and now that Squadron 42 is at the point they needed it to be, they are back working on the persistent universe again, and have been renamed the vehicle gameplay team. So the first question is there a gameplay reason to not have a rotational decoupled mode? So they say they have experimented with it, but it does make it very hard to control, trying to figure out which direction everything is. And for now, they are not planning to add one in, but in the future, they could have an IFCS malfunction perhaps, where the player will need to figure this out, but at this time, there is no plans for it. It isn't ruled out as a potential option in the future, but more priorities for other things right now. And I think it could be a good way to offer this as an option to disable IFCS, so players that want the option to have it disabled can do so if they practice and get good with it. It could be a benefit for them. But for me personally, I will just stick with the IFCS option. Next question is, have you started working on the Nautilus mine launching system? And if you aren't aware, the Nautilus is a space mine laying ship that can push out mines and create minefields in space. Now they say they have done mines specifically, which are set up and working in engine, but there is no active development being started on how they deploy yet. They have spoken about it, but nothing has been set, and it is not in active development at this time. Next question is, what multi-crew ship will be first tested in master modes? Now, they have tested quite a few options, but have not yet made a decision, as it will also be determined by what game mode they use. So a lot of variables to help them decide, but at this time, nothing has been decided. Next question is, will there be a new way to unflip ground vehicles? So for 320, with the new physics model for wheeled vehicles, they no longer automatically flip themselves back over, as they are handled by a completely new physics model. Yes, they would like to use the tractor beams eventually to allow players to flip vehicles back on their wheels, but that will be addressed later down the line. So for the Daymar Rally, the drivers will need to be even more careful next year if something isn't in place by then, which, to be fair, it might be with the tractor beams coming along. Next question is, how will QED or quantum enforcement devices work with master modes? So for the player using the quantum enforcement device, they will obviously have to be in SEM mode, which will allow them to have the QED active and usable. And for the players getting caught, the quantum drive will be disabled or restricted by the QED, which will mean that the top speeds will not be available to them, and they will be limited to SEM mode once they get pulled out of it. Now, this is the current plan and will be tested and balanced so that the playing field is fair and it falls more into skill and ability. But I actually find this very interesting, as this should mean either side has a job to do that can be practiced and skills get learned. Now, the pirate needs to be ready to pounce the minute someone is pulled out of quantum, so they can quickly disable and board before the quantum drive kicks back on, or maybe work together with an enforcement device. And for the person getting pulled out of quantum, they could make a run for it while being able to shoot and defend, hopefully giving enough time to make an escape. So lots to learn and work out for both parties involved, and it can't be more or less sided for either party, but I certainly look forward to how this will work in the future. Next question, are there plans to change how ground vehicles accelerate under analog controls? And they say yes, these new physics updates were the first step to ground vehicles, and now they will be working on allowing granular control for throttle and braking, which is brilliant news. Question after that is, what is holding up the Ranger from getting added? Now, the Ranger, if you are unaware, is essentially a motorbike. So the new wheeled vehicle physics update again is the first step here, which will need to be applied to a couple of other vehicles that are yet to receive these changes, being the Drake Mule and the Tumbril Nova Tonk. The new tyre model and physics will obviously be heavily involved in the Ranger bike, but they want to make sure that they find a good balance between simulation and arcade to make sure it feels right and it's fun. Will we ever see better headlights on ships is the next question, and this is something being worked on right now and actively being improved, working with the lighting team, and different manufacturers will have different standards. Will ground vehicles run out of fuel? And they say yes. Part of the next step for ground vehicles is this resource network, which includes things like fuel for them, and this is definitely a good thing, as it will add so much more to the game for ground vehicles, having to ensure that they have enough fuel, repairing them, physically swapping out their components, and so on and so forth, especially in regards to exploration and racing, as I can see this having a huge impact on both of those aspects. Also though, I personally think that different manufacturers could use different fuel types. For example, Drake's ground vehicles could run on hydrogen fuel, while Origin may have batteries as their fuel type. A nice option that I think could offer benefits and hindrances in different areas depending on their role, but that's just my 2 cents. Next question is, are there any plans for accurate terrain physics? And they say yes. Right now it is very generalized, but with this new tyre model, it allows them a lot more definition with the terrain, like ice, tarmac, and so on. They do need to build a system so that the tyre model communicates with the terrain, and they need to mark up the terrain with the environment team to make sure that it communicates between each other. So it will be a multi-team job, but that is part of the plan. Next question is, why is the centre of mass in the Nova Tonk so high? Is this why it tips over so much? Now they say that the issue isn't a high centre of mass, as the centre of mass is actually quite low for the Nova Tonk. It is to do with the collision detection of objects, and that they don't have enough dampening, and this causes the Tonk to hit something and then just practically flip. They are working on this and have done some changes to the ground vehicle collision physics and suspension that will help to alleviate the issue, but there is certainly more to do. Next question, are there plans for internal reloading of weapons? And they have spoken about this internally, and they think it would be a very cool aspect to the game, having players inside a ship running around and reloading weapons, either internally or externally. And I guess it would ultimately come down to the balance more than anything, but it would be pretty epic having that role inside of a ship. Will there be any more changes to hover vehicles to help stop them from exploding too easily? Now, they say, and I somewhat agree actually, that the trouble isn't that there is a big issue with the bikes themselves. It is more that you're likely crashing into something at a very high speed, so they will of course blow up. But they did say that there is more they can do to help players navigate better, and there are assists in already to help stop collisions as much. But I think once we get the physical damage system in, crashing a vehicle into a rock at certain speeds, instead of just blowing up, could disable it, could knock off items or damage the vehicle in some way, rather than just explode. But until that comes along, I guess they can't really see how it's going to work, and then they will likely tune it from that point on. Next question, are trailers for ground vehicles a possibility? So being able to tow a trailer. Now they love this idea, it's not necessarily planned, and it would be a different team who decide upon this, but I do think it's a great idea, and I reckon it's something we will certainly see one day, being able to tow certain modules, cargo modules, caravan modules. I think it makes sense, but I guess it's more of a priority thing. Next question is, what is CIG's stance on community feedback, and is the Fury set for further improvements? Now, they personally love feedback from the community and love to hear our thoughts, but for the Fury, generally every vehicle they release now, they try to balance it for the game that we have now to some degree, but ultimately also what is coming in the near term and the long term as well. This is a bit of a difficulty with the persistent universe, as there are big changes coming like master modes and resource network that will affect every ship, so it is an ongoing battle really to try and make sure that they perform in the window they're all supposed to, balanced to every other ship now, but ultimately if there are discrepancies, it is most likely for future changes coming in. Next question is simply stealth, ? Now, they see stealth as a twofold thing. One being hiding, so moving a ship's resources to control how much you are seen in the verse, and then secondly, it is masking, which is altering what other people see when they look at you. Now, stealth is mostly reliant on ship emissions, altering the emissions to look like something else, like a different ship or an anomaly, or maybe using the ship systems and holding them, not releasing the heat for a long term so that you can hide. But of course, this will mean your internals of the ship will heat up. Now, part of the component and stealth gameplay will be determined by what ship and components you have and their intention for that ship. Some ships are designed for stealth better than others, but also skill in managing your systems will be applicable in stealth gameplay once that comes in as well. Next question, will there be aerodynamics applied to ground vehicles that could include things like drafting? Now, they did say that with the racing scene in Star Citizen, drafting definitely could have a place there. They may try to incorporate this with the next update for ground vehicles, like applying some aerodynamics, but they don't want to go full sim with things like downforce and so forth, as that gets very complicated very quickly. But they will look to include some elements of this. Now, I would love for them to model full simulation in this regard, Maybe not full sim, but a good amount of it so that it'll have an impact on how we drive and race. But I do get that it's not really necessary for Star Citizen, so if it is ever going to come to a point where it's along the lines of simulation, it would be way later down the line rather than anytime soon. Next question, any plans for the Gladiator? Now, one of the devs were just testing the Gladiator to see what they could improve on it, and there is a lot that they can do, so hopefully we start to see this roll out soon. A similar question for the Terrapin. And for the Terrapin, with it having VTOLs, all the thruster types for all ships will be getting improvements along with the flight mechanics. So main, maneuvering, VTOL, retros, plus there will be a lot of aerodynamic changes for all ships as well. So not just the Terrapin, not just the Gladiator, but every ship will be getting some updates for how they fly and how they handle with master modes as well. That's another part that will drastically impact how we fly. One question was, what's the plan for pets on board ships? Where will they sit? Can they sit in the co-pilot seat? So although they can't really answer the question, it was more of a novelty question. If you are unaware, pets are actually confirmed as a stretch goal. So one day we will be able to have pets of varying types on our ships, in our hubs and whatnot. And then the final question is, how do you determine how well or how bad a vehicle handles? And they say when ships are in concept, they outline the ship's purpose and its loadout, and then when it moves through the pipeline, they do have a solid matrix of where all of the ships are in terms of flight and combat and power and so forth, and this allows them to find where that particular ship should fit. And of course, all ships will have their place. There is by no means one ship to rule them all, but like with the previous question, there are many factors that will determine how good or bad each ship performs. And a lot of those changes are in the works now with master modes, aerodynamics, physical damage, and so on and so forth. So a pretty decent episode of Star Citizen Live, talking further about all things vehicles. Not a lot of new stuff to be learnt, but still nice to hear certain aspects are progressing. I do think over the next year we are going to see many big changes coming to ships. That will most definitely change how they fly, how they handle, how they perform, and compare to one another. And as they get more refined to be more where the original intention of that ship should be, we are going to need to assess whether these changes suit our abilities for those particular ships, or whether a different option in the same category is a better choice. So a lot to come, and hopefully once it's all done, the ships will be on point, and it is onwards and upwards. But with that said, let us move on. So also this week, there was an Alpha 318 and Alpha 319 post-mortem, which is where CIG talk about the good, the bad, and how they can improve from each patch release. Always an interesting read and very insightful as to how server meshing may be rolled out this year and into next. Pirate Week kicks off with a very cool treasure photo hunt. I will post the details in the description below should you want to take part. Both the Persistent Universe and Squadron 42 monthly reports were released. I have already covered the Squadron report, which again I will link below, with the Persistent Universe report on its way sometime this week. And for Alpha 320, there have been almost daily patches as the build gets pushed through all of the new testing waves, with it reaching open PTU now, I believe, so everybody who has an account can decide to play the PTU if they so choose. But more importantly, CIG have stated that they do not intend to perform a wipe, with some updated information regarding how long-term persistence and wiping works, which I have linked in the description below, and highly suggest reading this, as it also offers some good advice on how to mitigate the severity of any potential wipes and how to ensure that you keep your things. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.